What if you could just start over? Design a new country from the ground up. Well, that's exactly what we're looking at today. We're diving into a proposed constitution for something called the Meritocratic Republic of Canada. We're going to go deep into the architect's own documents to really understand the vision behind it all, from the big ideas right down to the nitty-gritty of how it would actually work.
But that brings up a huge question, right? What really makes a nation a nation? Is it just lines on a map, a set of laws, or is it something more fundamental? The Constitution we're about to unpack hinges its entire philosophy on one very specific and pretty controversial answer to that question.
And that answer is demographics. This whole proposal argues that a nation is defined first and foremost by its people. The entire thing is built on this one core idea, that the main goal is to preserve what it calls the founding European character of Canada. Okay, so to really get a handle on the solution they're proposing, we've got to first understand the problem as they see it, because this entire constitution is framed as a direct response to what its author sees as a massive crisis facing Canada right now.
And here is that diagnosis, straight from the source. This quote from one of their main planning documents is pretty stark. It claims that having no demographic protections is the same as allowing legal genocide. That's an incredibly strong claim, and it's the central problem this whole blueprint is designed to solve.
So, if that's the diagnosis, what's the cure? Well, the architect actually lays out a whole spectrum of options, from doing nothing at all to, well, something much more extreme. All right, this diagram right here is really the key to the whole thing. It maps out all the possibilities they considered. Down at the bottom, you have E for empty. That's their term for the current system. And way up at the top, you have F for full gas, which represents the absolute ideological extreme. The proposal we're actually looking at tries to land somewhere in the middle. So let's start at the bottom, the empty position. This is the status quo, which the architect describes as having, quote, zero provisions for demographic protections. In their view, this is the fundamental weakness of the entire current system. And then you have the other end of the spectrum, full gas. This is, well, the most radical option imaginable. A nation that is 100% European. Under this idea, anyone else would just be a provisional resident, and that means they'd have no political rights, no vote, no say, nothing. So the architect looks at both of those options and basically says, no thanks. They reject both extremes. Instead, they try to forge what they call a pragmatic or plausible balance. This is the real core of the Constitution, so let's break it down. Okay, here's how they stack up. Instead of the 100% full gas model, the actual proposal aims for a 90% European demographic. But here's the crucial difference, the status of indigenous peoples. Where the full gas idea leaves them in this weird limbo without any rights, this proposal explicitly makes Indian and Métis populations fully equal citizens. So why this specific inclusion? Well, the Constitution's own summary calls it a final, one-time, and non-expandable act of historic reconciliation. The key phrase there is final and non-expandable. This is meant to be a permanent, settled deal that can't be changed later. Okay, so that's the what and the why. Now for the how. How would a system like this actually work on the ground? The Constitution gets into some pretty amazing detail on the machinery for making it all happen. According to Article 9, proving you qualify as a citizen of unmixed European descent is a step-by-step process. You start with the obvious stuff, official records like birth, baptismal, marriage certificates. If you don't have those, you can move to sworn statements from 2 other citizens. And only as a last resort, DNA evidence is allowed. The whole state would basically run on 2 massive databases, a National Registry of Citizens to keep track of who's in and who's out, and a National Registry of Qualified Experts. That second one is part of the whole meritocracy idea. But for now, we're going to focus on the Citizen Registry because it's absolutely central to the demographic goals.
Now, the level of security they're proposing for these registries is wild. It's extraordinary. We're not just talking about digital files. We're talking multiple redundant backups, including fireproof paper archives and even physical plates made of nickel or sapphire, micro-etched with data and designed to last for 1,000 years.
And to make absolutely sure no one messes with this system, the Constitution creates a brand new capital crime, registry sabotage. Any person who even tries to tamper with the data gets the death penalty. That's it. No appeals, no pardons. So, with the who of the nation locked down this tightly, the next question is how you get there. So, what's the game plan? How do you get from the Canada we know today to this completely different future? Well, the Constitution details a very specific, phased, 10-year transition period to make it happen. Article 16 lays out what it calls a phased remigration program. It's a systematic process to remove everyone who doesn't qualify as a citizen. Phase 1 is temporary visa holders and undocumented people. Phase 2 is permanent residents, starting with the newest ones and working backwards. And Phase 3 covers all other long-term residents who don't fit the new citizenship rules. And the final piece of this whole transition is set to a very strict clock, exactly 10 years. 10 years from the day the Constitution is ratified. This is where that one-time act of historic reconciliation comes full circle. On the 10th anniversary, any record that a citizen was included under that special clause for Indian and Métis people gets wiped. Permanently. From that moment forward, the state would only recognize one single, indivisible type of citizen. So, there you have it. That's the blueprint. A nation defined by demographics, enforced by unchangeable registries, and achieved through a 10-year remigration plan. The architect presents this whole thing as an act of national preservation, but it really forces you to grapple with a tough question. Where exactly is the line between preserving a nation and excluding people? This proposal offers one very clear and very controversial answer. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a close look at a proposed constitutional article, Article 9, which gets right to the heart of a fundamental idea, defining a nation by its people. You know, this is a huge question, right? What really makes a nation? And the source material we're digging into today doesn't just ask this question, it gives a very clear, very specific answer. So let's just jump right in. This is the very first line of the proposed Article 9 for what's called the Meritocratic Republic of Canada. And wow, it immediately sets the stage. This single sentence is the bedrock for everything that follows. Now, this article is way more than just a statement of principle. It lays out a whole system, a clear set of rules for what it means to belong. So let's break down exactly how citizenship is defined here. Okay, so the core concept is unmixed European descent. And this isn't just a vague idea. The article is very precise about it being the one and only basis for full citizenship, including all political rights, and it specifies how you go about proving it. And here's how that proof works. There's a really clear hierarchy of evidence. You can start with the traditional stuff, civil or church records. Then there's testimony from fellow citizens. And finally, as the ultimate confirmation, it brings in modern science, accredited DNA evidence. The article also makes a point to address the Indian and Métis people who are, of course, the historical inhabitants of the land. It does this through a special, one-time provision, which is described as a final act of reconciliation. And this slide really shows the two pathways clearly. For those of European descent, it's an ongoing process based on ancestry. For the Indigenous and Métis, it's a single, one-time grant. And the stated goal here is really important. After 10 years, all distinctions are removed to create one single, unified class of citizen. So if you have these clear rules, you need a system to manage them, right? That's where the national registries come in. The article proposes creating two incredibly secure registries to act as the backbone for this entire framework. And when we say secure, we mean secure. The measures described are just extraordinary. We're talking encrypted digital ledgers, permanent paper archives in vaults, even micro-etched sapphire plates stored deep underground. The whole system is designed to last for 1,000 years, to survive basically anything you can think of. To really underscore how vital these registries are to the nation's survival, the document makes this point crystal clear. Tampering with them isn't just a crime. It's considered a crime against the posterity of the nation. And the penalty reflects that. It's death. Okay, so we have the rules for citizenship and the system to protect them, but what about the situation on the ground right now? The article lays out a very methodical plan for how to transition to this new reality. This plan is called a phased remigration program. A new government body, the National Registry and Continuity Directorate, would be in charge. Its entire purpose would be to bring the country's actual population into alignment with its new constitutional definition. And it's not a chaotic process. It's laid out in logical phases. It starts with those who have the weakest ties to the country and moves backward from there. The document also makes a point of saying that voluntary compliance would be encouraged with financial help for repatriation. So all of this, the rules, the registries, the transition plan, it all leads to the big question. Why? What's the philosophy behind such a dramatic change? Well, the source material actually gives us a visual to explain the core reasoning. This image lays out what the authors call a spectrum of demographic protection. What's really interesting is that it frames their proposal not as an extreme, but as a carefully chosen middle path between two other possibilities. Let's really break down what we're looking at here.
Okay, this table shows the three options on that spectrum. At the bottom, you have empty. This is described as having zero demographic protections, a situation the source argues allows for a kind of legal genocide where politicians, corporations, or banks can just replace a nation's people for their own interests. At the very top, you have full gas, a 100% European nation which is presented as an ideal. The proposal we're discussing is positioned right in the middle as the practical, achievable solution, securing a 90% European demographic while fully integrating the Indian and Métis peoples as equal citizens.
And this quote, this really gets to the absolute core of the argument. The point being made is that older constitutions never had these kinds of explicit protections because the idea that a nation's own leaders would facilitate the replacement of their people was just unthinkable. It was never even considered a possibility. So the crucial takeaway is this. These constitutional provisions are framed as a necessary defense in the modern world. They're a shield against a very modern kind of tyranny, where special interests, be they political or corporate, can effectively erase a nation's founding people for ideological reasons or just for profit. And that brings us back to the fundamental question. If a constitution is truly for the people, then how do you define who the people are? This document doesn't leave that question open. It gives a firm answer, arguing that for a nation to survive and protect its culture, that definition has to be clear, explicit, and enshrined in its highest law.